Now, I hope now the friends online, we want to start punctual. I want to welcome all of you. And we can start, I think now, it's right in time. Well, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the most gracious and the most merciful. Distinguished friends, I have the honor to welcome all of you to the 6th event of the Vienna Institute for Middle East Studies, VIIMES. Today's topic is BRICS vis-a-vis Middle East. At the outset, I feel obliged to express deepest sorrow for humanitarian tragedy in Gaza, the largest open-air prison of the world, where over 3,800 Palestinians are killed, including 1,500 children and over 13,000 injured in less than 2 weeks, as the record shows now. I regret that our event coincides with such humanitarian catastrophe. It suffices just to quote the message of Sadi, the prominent poet of 12th century, also applies now. Human beings are members of a whole, a creation of one essence and soul. If one member is afflicted with pain, other members uneasy would remain. If you have no sympathy for human pain, the name of human you cannot retain, unquote. My dear friends, in the same token, as peace-loving scholars and practitioners, we are all expected to mobilize and realize all potentials to stop the massacre and to look for the ultimate sustainable solution for the acute humanitarian crisis in the Middle East. I hope we will be able to do our responsibility. Distinguished colleagues, as you are all aware, the Vienna International Institute for Middle East Studies was established in March 2022 with a noble cause for peace and prosperity in the Middle East. The vision and mission were adopting innovative approach to conduct in-depth professional interactions and dialogue with top experts and practitioners. Via closed meeting, track 2 or track 1.5, aiming at a breakthrough in the existing deadlocks on social, economic, security issues in this strategic region. VIIMES has held so far 5 successful expert roundtables. The statement of the experts, of course, after their consent, because we have closed meetings, are accessible at the VIIMES website. Our events are closed only upon invitation and following Chatham House Rule. I request the panelists to limit their presentation to 10 minutes, 15 minutes, so that a maximum of 15 minutes, so that we will have ample time for interactions. I have already requested my esteemed friends to elaborate on all aspects of important events, namely the 4 countries of the Middle East: Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Iran joined the BRICS. And in this context, to address the following topics: review the BRICS, including its mandate and potentials, review of the potentials of the 4 new members of the Middle East to contribute to BRICS, review the possible contribution of BRICS to sustainable development of the Middle East, obstacles to realization of expectation with recommendations to remove the obstacles and constraints, and finally, the impact of joining the 4 Middle Eastern countries to BRICS on security issues in this region. And of course, other topics if they wish so, depending on their expertise. Distinguished colleagues, I request all of you kindly to put on mute mode so that the noise would not disturb, unless, of course, you are invited to talk. Without further ado, I would like to introduce the distinguished panelists as, of course, as short as possible, with all apologies to them because they have lengthy CV, and due to time constraints, I try to summarize it. The first speaker on my list is Dr. Renato Coho Bauman das Neves. I hope I pronounce it well. From Brazil. He got his bachelor in economics from University of Brazil, master in economics, University of Brazil again in 1976, PhD in economics from University of Oxford 1982. He is top economist in Institute of Applied Economic Research, professor of international economics, University of Brazil, member of OECD Advisory Committee on Knowledge and Technology, member of the Consulting Group of Brazil-China Business Committee. He has experience in economy focusing on trade relation, trade policy, economic integration, and more specifically on the following subjects: growth, development, and regional integration, trade policy, and intermediate trades. Of course, as I said, the resume is lengthy, and I'm proud to have such an eminent expert. I think that suffices. I request my friend, Dr. Bauman, to have the floor. Dr. Bauman, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, and thank you for having me in this conversation. May I start by saying that when we think about BRICS, there's a leitmotif that led to the very creation of the group, which is to try and influence global governance. And having said that, over time, the enlargement of the group, starting with South Africa and now with 6 new members, has to do with what I would call the BRICS regional bias. South Africa came in not because of the basic conditions that led to the original creation of the group, demography, size, and size of GDP, but because there was a need to have some African countries on board. Now we have, there was no Middle East countries on board. Now we have that region within the group. Now, having said that, Brazil and India have always been very reluctant with regard to the Chinese insistence over time to enlarge the group. And why so? Because the basic feeling was that the 5 original countries should try and build a convergence of interests and mutual initiatives, and that is not quite clear so far. But, you know, facts of life, it was a bit of a surprise for even us in Brasilia that do not belong to the inner circle of decision of the Brazilian government to realize that it was approved, the enlargement. Of course, from the viewpoint of Brazil, there was an additional argument to bring in Argentina, in particular, the good relationship of the Brazilian government with the present Argentine administration, and given the dismal situation of the Argentine economy, it would be very helpful to bring that country in. Now, there are at least 2 reasons for the enlargement. One, the very insistence by China in its overall proposal of building up a South-South global, whatever that means, and as a byproduct to enlarge the use of renminbi as a universal currency. But also the Russia-Ukraine conflict has led to intensifying a feeling against anti-Western feeling that there was some manifestation here and there. Now, having said that, some general consideration now specifically with regard to the BRICS Plus. There is, of course, a good economic potential. It comprises 6 of the 10 biggest oil exporters, the main oil importer, China, and about 40% of total production of petroleum, gas, and renewable energy. It comprises, of course, the sovereign funds of Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, which is something to be taken into account. It is expected that Middle Eastern members could contribute to increasing the capital of the new development bank, as well as to enlarge the currency reserve agreement, a dimension that's not very often considered. And because due to the NDB rules, investment by the NDB can only take place in BRICS members, that is music for Argentina, Ethiopia, and perhaps Iran and Egypt for that matter. Now, on the political viewpoint, this enlargement raises some eyebrows in Washington. And of course, as the ambassador has mentioned, and I fully agree with the sentiments with regard to what is going on in Israel and Gaza area, the present Israeli conflict, and how do the BRICS fit in? For that matter, we have to take into account what was the position of the BRICS with regard to the Russia-Ukraine war. There has never been a common position by the group with regard to that war. As a matter of fact, there was an absent vote in the UN General Assembly when that was brought in. And this is a very sensitive, to my view, a very sensitive and important issue. Why so? Because if you are to have a group, that requires, by definition, homogeneity of purpose and homogeneity of objectives. And if one of the members has a problem, it is to be expected that the other members would support that partner. That has not been so with regard to Russia. And of course, specifically the Iranian position with regard to the Israeli conflict, present Israeli conflict, is being watched very closely. But having said that, I would not expect an automatic alignment of the BRICS with regard to a more proactive position by Iran, new member of the group. So, and as a matter of fact, we don't hear from the press with regard to the Israeli conflict. We don't hear reference to the BRICS. We hear reference to Russia, to China, to Iran, middle, of course, Egypt, little less Saudi Arabia, but not with regard to BRICS as such. And that's, I think, is a very important aspect, because that's, I understand, one of the issues that brings us here today. To what extent can we expect a BRICS plus positioning with regard to these to the two conflicts that we have right now? So far, it's not quite clear what are the chances to have a homogeneous position with regard to those conflicts, even because the Brazilian, in some extent, I guess, the South African position has always been one of neutrality with regard to those situations. I don't want to monopolize the time. I'd go for effects of the enlargement on the groups and some challenges for the BRICS as a group. But perhaps I should keep that for the discussion later on, if you allow me. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador.
Important issues and points that you raised. I think these are a lot of food for thoughts. And now I would request our next speaker will be Professor Alexander Nikitin from Russia. He received his PhD in International Relations in 1983 and became In 2000, the professor of the political science department of McGill University, as well as professor of state management department in Moscow State University. He is the director of the BRICS Center for Euro-Atlantic Security, the director of Center for Political and International Studies. He is the president of Emirates of Russian Political Science Association and chairman of the International Cooperation Council. Professor Nikitin is an international expert on international security, peacekeeping, conflict resolution, international relations, NATO policy and related Russian-NATO, nuclear policy and non-proliferation, regulation of the private military and security companies, and civil-military relations. He is a senior research fellow, section head. He's been for 10 years, 1979 to 89, in USA and Canada Studies Institute. Since 1989 till present, director of the Center for Political and International Studies, a non-governmental research institute involved in analytical work, and published a lot of papers. Of course, it's a lengthy resume. Of course, he is the vice chairman of the Pugwash, which is a Nobel Prize winner organization, and also the member of the expert council of the Peer Center. Since 2005, as an official expert of United Nations, nominated by United Nations Commissioner for Human Rights. He is the author of 100 articles and so forth. The last but not the least is that he has given the honor, he is the member of advisory board of our institute. Professor Nikitin, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. But I need to share screen because I have a presentation with many maps and slides. Ali, can you arrange right for sharing screen?
Now the operator is giving you the permission. Yes.
Still, the screen sharing is disabled by the host, says my computer. From Vienna, you need to send the signal to allow participants to project on screens. Aha, now it works. Very good. Yes. I would like to share some observations on the BRICS enlargement, taking also some lessons from the Shanghai Cooperation Organization enlargement, which also happened not so long ago. Practically, when less than 2 months ago, the leaders of 5 BRICS countries met in Sandton, the suburb of Johannesburg, they started very important process, the process of reconfiguration of the international system and of world politics. We should remember that the BRICS started from the computer modeling of economic trends of major powers, which was done by the company Lehman Brothers. And researchers from that company, they were looking for natural clusters of alike graphs and trends, for example, like this, when they compared the graphics of India and China, graphics of Russia and Brazil, they found a lot of similarities. And this was creation of several clusters of countries on paper. But then politicians made some conclusions from such similarities. Other clusters forgot about the similarities, but the cluster which consisted of Russia, China, Brazil, India decided that political integration of the countries which are what let us call this emerging world powers, this is extremely important. But the question is who we call world powers. We recently did in our institute an analysis, computerized analysis of the economic, political, social parameters of all states members of the United Nations. We consulted on this with our colleagues from Switzerland. At that period, yet some Americans participated and Chinese researchers. And after some work with computers, we calculated that 17 countries are concentrated concentrating 65% of world population, 80% of the world economy, and 86% of global military spending. Let me show these countries again and mark in red color the BRICS members. You will see that China, India, Brazil, South Africa, Russia, everybody is here out of original 5 members, among 17 countries which are showing the best combination of the world parameters. And we see here new BRICS members like Saudi Arabia is here, Egypt is here, Argentina is here. Practically, it's important to understand that in the hands of this group of countries, almost all of world economy and world military affairs are concentrated. The concentration is now a little bit wider than 5 countries. We now have 11 members of the BRICS. Here they are represented on the level of ministers. But while represented on the map, we see here in red color the old members of BRICS, in green color the new members, but we also have a yellow color. What is yellow color? Yellow is official applications to BRICS. Minister of Foreign Affairs of South Africa during the summit officially announced that in written form, applications to join BRICS in possible future was applied from Africa by Algeria, Morocco, Nigeria, Senegal. From the Middle East, 3 countries are pretending to become BRICS members: Kuwait, Bahrain, Palestine. In Asia, we have Bangladesh, Vietnam, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, and Thailand, who would like to be within BRICS. In Latin America, we have Bolivia, Venezuela, Cuba, and Honduras. And from European countries, Belarus. And if we compare BRICS and G7, the group of 7 most developed Western countries, we see some interesting trends. For example, in combination, India and China, and please notice that now India has more population than China, first time in history, 1,420,000,000. In combination, China, India, and other members of BRICS are approximately 3.25 billion of population, while G7 is less than 1 billion. But in GDP, G7 is still stronger. G7 has approximately 44% of world GDP, while BRICS is about 26%. But let's compare differently. Let's compare that United States has the biggest economy in the world, which is approximately $25 trillion. While when we combine all BRICS countries, then we have this 30%, out of which China, only China, is already 18 trillions. And now BRICS concentrates 46% of the world population, 29% of world economy, and 43% of world oil production. On these graphs, we are seeing how in green color, what was added by new countries. For example, in oil production, the achievement is the biggest because practically more than it was before in BRICS, more is added, and now 43% of the world oil production is done by the BRICS countries, when Saudi Arabia, Iran, and United Arab Emirates brought the oil production to this basket. If we compare by decades, in 1995, when the whole story was starting, then the G7 countries were much more powerful. Almost half of the world economy was on their side, and the countries which later composed BRICS were only 17% of world economy. Then in 2010, we became closer. Still, the G7 countries were 34% of world economy, BRICS about 27%. But now in 2023, the Western economies are 30% of world production, and we are counting by purchasing power parity, PPP. And BRICS, by this parameter, is bigger and more successful than G7. If we dive into several industries, we find that the oil reserves, the discovered oil reserves on the territory of the BRICS countries today are 44% of everything which is known in the world. And reserves on the territory of G7 is only 4%. Industrial production, 38% concentrated in BRICS, 30% in G7. Exports, here G7 is still stronger, about 29 against 23 at BRICS. But in agriculture, in rice harvesting, BRICS is 55% of the world production of rice, while the G7 is only 3%. Aluminium production, BRICS is 79% and the G7 only 1% of the world aluminium production. And gold mining of a new gold, 31% in BRICS and 12% in the G7. There are interesting comparisons between BRICS on one side and the NATO, the largest military alliance of 30 Western countries. Some of these comparisons, of course, are a little bit journalistic. For example, these combat tanks. You may witness that in BRICS, in combination, we have like 42,000 tanks, while NATO has only 20. But obviously, we understand that never the tanks of Brazil can jump into South Africa, and they together cannot jump to Eurasia and be joined with Russian or Chinese tanks. So this is a little bit journalistic comparison, but some of these comparisons are important. For example, nuclear weapons. In combination, in the BRICS countries, we have 4 nuclear powers, Russia, India, Pakistan, and China. And 7,000 nuclear warheads, including those which are in fields and those which are in storages. In NATO countries, we have only 3 nuclear countries, USA, UK, and France, and 6,700 nuclear weapons. At the same time, let's be realistic. BRICS is not an international organization. Why? Because it has no charter. It has no accession criteria. It has no sanctions which he could impose on the violators. It has no budget. It has no headquarters and no secretary general and no registration at the UN in the capacity of international organization. Then what is BRICS? BRICS is a kind of interstate club of mutual recognition and mutual assistance, which is done technically via interministerial coordination and dispersed initiatives and programs. Practically, the last BRICS summit was preoccupied with 2 main items. One was enlargement, and the task was to elaborate criteria. And even when the decision was made that we are taking Argentina, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, Egypt, and United Arab Emirates, no criteria were accessed in any document, because practically there is no charter to which we can insert such a criteria, and the decision was made on the basis of very pragmatic estimation, ad hoc decision. The second point in the summit was de-dollarization as a goal. Not yet as a set of mechanisms, but still the experimental trade of oil and gas in national currencies was discussed, in rupees and rubles between Russia and India, in yuan between Russia and China. And we should realistically understand that, for example, European Union is based upon integration. Integration is merging of economies, merging of financial systems, while Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS are based only on cooperation, which is much weaker. Not yet integration. Cooperation, not many economies are interested and ready to merge with Chinese economy, and financial systems do not want to merge with yuan-based system yet. Which mechanisms we have in BRICS? Yes, for now, summits of heads of states and heads of governments, which happen quite rarely, and normally they are not basically discussing things, just signing the decisions or solutions which were elaborated on a sectoral consultations of ministries, meeting of ministers of foreign affairs, meeting of ministers of defense. Now with 11 formal members, it would be much more difficult. BRICS also has a mechanism of business club-like dialogue between big companies of the countries, and also educational, cultural, NGO ties, humanitarian dimension. But let us realistically understand that in BRICS, there are no obligatory, no binding decisions. And at the same time, non-Western structures like BRICS, like Shanghai Cooperation Organization, like Eurasian Economic Union, they do undermine the US or Western European or Japanese domination in world economy, in world finances, and in world politics and world ideology. They affirm multipolarity. Practically, for many BRICS countries, it's very important to affirm multi-directional political and economic orientation. They're not obliged to make a choice of friends, choice of adversaries. All states need to develop parallel and preferably normal relations with Washington, with London, with Brussels, with Beijing, with Moscow, with Delhi, with Tehran. We should not expect from many countries in the Middle East, for example, to make a final decision whether they are with Washington or they are with Moscow. Neither nor. They need relations on different dimensions. Now about Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Here is the emblem in the center, but then we see the flags of the 6 old members, which are Russia, Russia and China. China is a founding member. Russia is second founding member, and then we have Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan. But in 2015, it was a decision to invite Pakistan and India, and just last year, it was a decision to invite Iran. So we have 9 members, and the summits of BRICS and summits of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, they structurally look similarly. In modern maps, we are showing that Belarus already got invitation to join Shanghai Cooperation Organization next year as a 10th member. And Shanghai Cooperation Organization concentrates 45% of world population, 46 in BRICS, 45 in Shanghai, they are overlapping. And now it has 9 full members, plus observers, plus partners. And here we also see some yellow color. Yellow color are upcoming dialogue partners, those who expressed interest. And among those who expressed interest, we see again Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the countries who were just invited to BRICS. They want to be invited to Shanghai as well. And interested in partnership, Vietnam, Bangladesh, Iraq, and Syria. And again, Vietnam and Bangladesh are interested in both organizations, in BRICS and in Shanghai. Shanghai recently had in India, in Goa, just in May of this year, a meeting of foreign ministers. And interesting discussion took place that practically we have several structures which are pretending for world governments, and they compete for world governance. For example, P5, permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council, they are acting very often not in connoissance with G7, with a group of 7 largest Western countries. But in its turn, G7, developed 7, very often is in contradiction with G20, with developing 20, mostly representing the global South. And now G7 is compared and competes with new G9, Eastern 9, Shanghai Cooperation Organization summits of 9 presidents of 9 countries, non-Western countries. And G7 at the same time now is obliged to compete with new G11, with the BRICS 11 members. So we have several schemes, 5, 7, 9, 11, 20. All of them are competing and overlapping mechanisms for world governance. Finally, what BRICS can provide and what BRICS cannot provide. BRICS is not able to provide some parameters. BRICS has no military dimension as for now. BRICS is not a security community, which means that it is not able to care about the domestic security stability of members, not like NATO, for example. BRICS will no unify member states stance on conflicts. It was mentioned by previous presenters that really countries have different approaches to situation in Ukraine, situation in the Middle East, situation in many previous conflicts. BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation Organization provide a forum for negotiations and consultations, but they represent only one side of the Middle East conflict and lack representation of the other side of Israel and USA. So within the BRICS, we cannot much negotiate between the sides. We can only cooperate between countries which are more or less on the same side of the conflict. And macro projects involving all 11 full members of BRICS are improbable. Same way as Shanghai Cooperation Organization is not able to formulate macro projects with equal participation of all 9 member states. For example, say it's very difficult to imagine the project where, for example, South Africa Argentina and say Pakistan and Vietnam would be jointly cooperating in one big super project. But what BRICS may provide, it may provide slow elaboration of non-Western financial mechanisms, a kind of currency clusters. One cluster around yuan, one cluster around rupiah, one cluster around ruble. BRICS meetings could be instrumental for softening and stabilizing relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia, who both are pretending onto the leadership in the Middle East. And sitting at one negotiations table, they can stabilize a little bit the interrelations. BRICS meetings could attract more attention of Russia and China to the Middle East agenda, because these giant countries not necessarily are deeply involved into the conflict resolution in the Middle East. But like in Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the old members, like Big Five members, would resist, I'm predicting, would resist to enlarging the BRICS agenda indefinitely to sensitive issues of all new members. It happened in Shanghai when, for example, India and Pakistan joined. The countries like Tajikistan or Kyrgyzstan or even China itself were not happy that the new basket of problems arrived onto the table. They said, who will take care about small problems between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan when the huge India and Pakistan arrived with the Kashmir issue, with the nuclear contradiction, and so on. The same may happen within the BRICS. The agenda of BRICS should not be overloaded. But at the same time, let me finish on this slide. This is a pluralist model of a future world order. All these countries who attended the BRICS summit, they are a good promise for the better future. Thank you. Microphone. Ali, microphone.
Sorry, the microphone was off. And I want to thank you, Professor Nikitin, with well elaborated, particularly with these informative slides. I appreciate it. And now I follow the BRICS order, and the next one is India. Professor Varun Sahni from India. He's got his PhD from Oxford and has been professor of international politics at Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi since 2003. He has served as a Vice Chancellor of University Jammu from 2008 to 2012, and also Gao University from 2016 to 2021. Professor has written a number of books and has followed BRICS and its evolution for years and decades. For his outstanding contribution to research and teaching, he has also been awarded VKRV Rao Prize Social Science 2006 by Indian Council of Social Science Research. There are, I said, lengthy resume. I have the honor, in fact, to ask our dear friend, Professor Sain. Now you have the floor, sir.
Hello, thank you so much, Ambassador Soltanieh, and it's really good to be following Dr. Bauman and Dr. Nikitin, because they really sort of have said some very important things for all of us. Like Dr. Nikitin, I also have a very brief presentation, so I'll go ahead and share my screen, and I hope that sort of the organizers would give me that control.
Yes, it's already given.
Okay, brilliant. I hope my screen can be seen by everybody. You know, I'm not a specialist on sort of Middle Eastern affairs. What I propose to do is basically talk a bit about the BRICS themselves. I'm not being able to proceed for some reason. Even though I'm sharing my screen, I'm not being able to move the PowerPoint ahead. So let's save time. I'll just speak off my notes. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Maybe my operator will move it for you.
Maybe it's.
Let's see. Let's just give 1 minute, a couple of seconds, man. He will try because
Sure.
we have already given to him. I hope that he will help you. Now, the next slide. Yes, the first slide and the next one.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
go ahead. The next one. Next one. Yes.
Yeah. So you'll have to periodically keep pressing the head. So there are really two origin stories for the BRICS. The one origin story that we're all familiar with, is the sort of the Goldman Sachs story. Jim O'Neill, which is a series of reports that Goldman Sachs brought out from 2001. Argued about an indispensable need to reorganize global governance structures to include the BRIC. At that time, South Africa was not a part of the papers because of the future size of these economies and the impact that they would have on the world economy and on globalization. So this is kind of the standard origin story of the BRICS that sort of a lot of the Western literature projects. So it's really about competitors to the G7 in the world capitalist economy, and sort of trying to sort of accommodate these competitors, for the sake of sort of smooth functioning of the world capitalist economy. But there is another origin story, and I think it's very important for all of us to be cognizant of it. And this is a story which has. Please go to the next slide. And this is a story which is
Go to next slide.
about which is about Yevgeny Primakov, who was, of course, the foreign minister of Russia and then the prime minister of Russia, and beginning in 1999. So in fact, preceding Jim O'Neill, Primakov sort of promoted the RIC, the Russia, India, China strategic triangle. And here the explicit purpose was different. It was not about international political economy. It was about trying to create a strategic triangle to counterbalance the United States. This is the period in which US hegemony is in some ways sort of really beginning to express itself in all sorts of ways. And in 2006, Brazil joined the grouping when the 4 foreign ministers met at the margins of the general debate at the UNGA. Please go ahead. And this is very interesting, Primakov, because Primakov's ideas actually go back to something that Lenin had written in 1923 in Pravda, which is that in the final analysis, at a time when sort of world communism was really being established, Lenin had sort of, said that really Russia, India, and China account for the overwhelming majority of the population of the globe. So that's kind of a second origin story, if you will, and to some extent, the whole dilemma about the BRICS, as I see it as an analyst, is that you still have these two origin stories, which really, are in some ways radically different narratives. Please go ahead. Now, very quickly, I mean, let's not linger on this. If you sort of, don't account for great disruptors like global climate change, the melting of the permafrost on the tundra, the navigable Arctic, if you don't account for, major technological breakthroughs such as battery technology, new systems, new currencies, new systems of exchange. And if you look at a standard projection, these are what are the 10 largest national economies in the year 2050. Please go ahead. And what do these projections suggest to us? That, it suggests that power would have substantially shifted from the Euro-Atlantic to the Indo-Pacific. China would be the largest player in the game. Both China and India would be larger than the other top 10 countries combined, minus the US. So the US would be at number 2. Please go ahead. The West, however, and this is very important with regards to the second origin story that I signaled, the West would not have withered away. The US would remain the second largest player, and in the top 10 sort of national economies, the UK, France, and Germany would continue to remain significant. Please go ahead. Africa, quite notably, would, based on these projections, still be absent from global power. And then that is really, in some ways, a very sobering thought, particularly given that in this round of BRICS expansion, two of the countries that have been included are some of the major players in Africa. Brazil and Mexico, however, would be very much serious contenders in the global power game. Please go ahead. Now, I actually think it's quite remarkable that the BRICS have persisted, starting with the Ekaterinburg Summit of 2009, Brasilia in 2010, then in the Sanya Summit of 2011, South Africa gets included into the grouping, 2012 and 13, the meetings in New Delhi and Durban. Please go ahead. So every year, the BRICS countries have met. Fortaleza, Brazil in 2015, UFA in 14, UFA in 15, Goa in 16, 17 China, Johannesburg in 2018. Please carry on. And of course, 19, 20, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Some of these were, of course, virtual summits because of the global pandemic. I think it's pretty remarkable that, despite a lot of issues that have existed between these five countries, I signal in particular, the issues that have, snowballed between China and India, that the BRICS summits have continued. And as was pointed out by Dr. Nikitin, that it's not just the heads of state and government meeting, that there is a considerable amount of other civil society interaction and so on that also goes on with the BRICS. Please go ahead. Now, what would the power of the BRICS depend on? I think there are five interlocking factors here. The most obvious one are economic growth rates. That is the ultimate driver, has been, in world politics for a very long time and is going to continue. But also the ingenuity and vitality of their societies. So one of the big questions, you'll have to go back to the previous slide, please. Now, one of the big questions regarding Africa, for instance, is precisely this. These linear projections don't take into account that there's a young, extremely dynamic, hungry generation in Africa, some of whom are extremely well educated. We should not be surprised if sometime over the next 10, 15 years, there's a major technological breakthrough or emerging out of Africa. But ingenuity and vitality of these societies is going to be a critical factor. Relative power of regional rivals and extra-regional competitors, the ability to project their prominence in ways that others perceive as benign and attractive. This, I think, is extremely important, and this is something which, in the context of sort of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, is something we do need very much to keep in mind. And finally, the speed at which the power of the systemic hegemon declines relative to their own increasing power. As we have seen, the United States is pretty much still in the game. Whether we are now approaching a period of incipient bipolarity, or whether we are sort of evolving into a more multipolar sort of a world, is, I think, still very much an open question. We are living, all of us, still, I would argue, in a period of great strategic uncertainty. Please go ahead. And this brings me to global governance. And, in some of my writings, I've talked about the 10 Ps of global governance. Basically, in the last 15 years, 20 years, global governance has risen from really obscurity to becoming a seminal idea in international relations, both in the practice of international relations and definitely in terms of the academic work and the theorizing on international relations. And the core question about global governance, as I see it, is about how power operates in an interdependent environment in the absence of government. So, you have global governance precisely because you do not have world government. So how exactly do you, how exactly does this in an interdependent environment, how does power operate? Please go ahead. And as I see it, really, these 10 Ps, I've written about this, but participation, presence, and permanence, the key questions there are who decides and who is excluded, Then you have the question of posts, which is who implements programs and executes decisions. Then we have problems, postures, and positions, which is about what gets priority and when. We have policies and programs, which is about who benefits and at whose cost. And finally, of course, the alpha and omega of it all is power, which is how are matters decided and implemented. Please go ahead. Now, as I see it, the BRICS will become a genuinely revisionist force in global governance. And this is something which I wrote in a publication coming out of Brasilia a decade ago. The BRICS would become a genuinely revisionist force in global governance and world politics more broadly, only if they are able to transform themselves from a conglomeration of 5 large states with varied interests into an organization that has the ability to strategically add new members when the need arises. So it's that kind of process of transformation that's critical. And I think out here, the points that were being made by Dr. Nikitin, I think are really, I think, the heart of the matter, which is that you can have cooperation between large countries, particularly where something really fundamental like global governance is at stake. But to really become a revisionist force, in global governance, you do need an organization. Please go ahead. And that is where creating a permanent secretariat, I would argue, becomes really important. Again, as I said, this is an argument I made over a decade ago. It's interesting to see that enlargement is now happening, but it's not happening in any way that sort of, it would have been great if these 5 countries had made some steps towards organization before enlargement. So we now had enlargement before organization. And I think that's going to create a whole bunch of issues, going ahead. But I have 2 suggestions here. Both of them are kind of shoulds, are proposals, are suggestions. I think the permanent secretariat should be located well south of the equator, because, you do want sort of to avoid northern hemispheric geopolitics to the extent that you can. And, finding a lovely location somewhere in the southern hemisphere, like Cape Town or Rio de Janeiro, would be wonderful for a permanent secretariat. It would really need the BRICS would need to be renamed. I mean, the BRICS is not going to make any sense in a year's time. That now that you have 6 more members, you're going to have to rename. And I think a cooperation organization, a la SCO, perhaps, is sort of something that is needed. I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen as well. Or in fact, I'm not sharing my screen.
voice is on.
So I'm done. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Great. I appreciate all the speakers are impressing with this very valuable information. I know you try to shrink it because of time constraint. I'm grateful to all of you. Now, permit me to go to the next one, to China. Now we do have Dr. Jing Song, is the Associate Professor, Department of Sociology and Chinese University of Hong Kong. Dr. Song passed the Chinese bar exam in Beijing and also completed director studies in public international law and Hague Academy of the International Law. He obtained his bachelor and master's and PhD degree from Chinese University of Hong Kong, Harvard University, and Geneva Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies. His research focuses on transnational and global sociology, comparative historical sociology, and sociology of the law and global governance in areas such as global sanctions, financial capitalism, climate change, global carbon, environment, governance, etc. Also global digital governance, global health, human rights, multinational financial institutions, and of course, neoliberal globalization. He employed, of course, various methods, including fieldwork, interviews, ethnography, and other activities. There's a long list of activities. I'm very pleased that Dr. Song has accepted to join us. You have the floor, sir.
Okay. Dear Ambassador, hello everyone. So it's very I'm very delighted to share my perspective about the amazing topic. I like it very much. And I basically will follow the sequence of the 5 questions and try to explain some of my observation and also like the Chinese stance on these questions. So I will briefly, go through the questions very briefly. So the first question is the review of the BRICS, including its mandate and potentials. Well, in my view, in my humble opinion, BRICS Plus will be G7 club of the global south, or say would be the G7 club of the new international economic order. Bearing in mind, in the UN General Assembly, for the past 50 years, this is basically something I personally feel, this is something we really somehow achieve the target of new international economic order, possibly for the first time. For example, if we look into the comparative strength of the new, BRIC plus countries and relatively to G7. So this is my very straightforward conclusion. So this will be the next G7 club, but from global south. The second question is, how do we look into the potentials for the 4 new members from the new Middle East to contribute to BRICS? So here will be my sharing. The first part, I will quickly go through all those bilateral investment treaties and bilateral programs between the 4 members with China. And then I think you will very quickly make your own conclusion. For example, Egypt. So Egypt, for example, is the #1 recipient of Chinese investment in the entire Arab world. Not kidding. If you read newspaper, you will find out, for example, very recently, Egypt have their new, program called Suez Canal Economic Zone, and only this tiny economic zone already secure investment deal with Chinese investors for, $5 billion. And if you look into, for example, the past, 5 years or 10 years, every year Egypt can attract basically around this kind of scale investment from China, right? So in other words, Egypt and China already have a very significant investment relations. The second one, we look into Iran and China. There is a 25-year agreement, bilateral investment agreement. I would say this is remarkable, right? Just we can simply recall that memory, that hilarious moment. We read all those newspapers, like New York Times, Washington Post. On that day, they talk about how much they get surprised by this bilateral investment agreement, right? So this agreement was, again, $400 billion, right? And then we look into Saudi Arabia and China, and this is really bilateral investment. Chinese investors, they invest in infrastructures, plants, technologies in Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia, for example, their sovereign wealth funds, they are also very important strategic investors in Chinese technology company. So we see bilateral deal flow. This is something very remarkable, right? Bear in mind, if my observation is that this would be a G7. This is something we only see previously between G7 countries, right? We see this remarkable bilateral investment and bilateral cooperation, right? And then we look into, for example, UAE. In UAE, pretty much the same. For example, UAE and Hong Kong Central Bank, we have the cross-border trade settlement, right? We just signed the memo of mutual understanding. And also, possibly for insiders like me, we know that that would open up the possibility of central bank digital currency, right? And then if we look into UAE, Shanghai, Beijing, Hong Kong, we can find out, not limited to UAE, but for example, Dubai and UAE are composed of several different parts, right? So they have their own different investment office in Beijing and Shanghai and Hong Kong. We saw them, and they make remarkable investment. I know a lot of investment portfolios. So in other words, they realize something. They realize that they can do something we don't see before. Is they don't really invest those petrodollar to the U.S. market anymore. They invest some of their portfolio to the Chinese technology innovation, right? And definitely they make remarkable return from this smart investment decisions. And that would be, you can easily make your conclusion on the second question. This is the potential, right? We see that the Middle East countries, or say those Gulf countries, or including Egypt, this is not Gulf Council members, but we see these opportunities and potentials, these imaginations, right? So this is something we see. This is only previously we see in G7, but now we see it in BRICS Plus. That is not limited to geo-economy or geopolitics. No, we are making real technological innovation, right? And then that's also my observation to the third question. So how we look into the possible future contributions of BRICS to sustainable development. Again, if you look into the portfolios of those corporations between China and Saudi, you will find out it's a very beautiful business model, right? You see investment, you see technology innovation, and you see those cloud companies, right? Those Saudi's cloud computational centers is based on those teams, those very young people, young talent, smart people, right? Scientists, engineers who really study something, doing R&D, right? So when you interview with those people, you don't feel they are so-called developing countries. You feel they are very mature people. It's pretty much like Silicon Valley, but not in United States anymore, right? In Global South, in BRIC Plus. And then we see the joint cooperation, like in education, between universities. And again, if we look into the most cutting edge, say, universities in Saudi Arabia, and the university is called KAUST, right? And they have a lot of academic scholars from China, or those so-called Chinese scholars in United States or in other overseas countries, right? So they are making a remarkable contribution to KAUST. And in my imagination, I don't think KAUST will be the only case, but KAUST will be a remarkable future case, because all the other countries can replicate exactly the same model, right? And then the fourth question. So do we see obstacles? Yes, definitely. In this sense, I fully agree with Professor Alexander Nixon, right? We see the problem. What's the problem? Is global governance mechanism. And I also totally agree with Professor Sani, if I read your name in the group A, is we can find out that, for example, in global north, we have World Bank, IMF, WTO, ICISD. ICISD is International Center for state investor disputes or dispute settlement, right? So they have this mature global governance mechanism, or say global governance infrastructure. This is not those hard infrastructure like highway or railway. No, this is soft institution that make global governance work. For example, we look into, for example, the Bretton Woods system. It failed, right? But what something really remarkable in G7 is, even though they realize or they find out, Bretton Woods don't work, then they try to figure out some new mechanism, right? They try to fix it up step by step. And this is something I will see in the coming, say, 3 decades, right? But it would take basically 20 or say 30 years to figure out what's wrong and how to solve it, right? And in BRICS, I think we can build up the same, and we can figure out how to build this global governance infrastructure between us. Like possibly, the roundtable today is the starting point, because this is something I find out all of us agree, right? We find out we need, and we will do something towards the global governance mechanism between BRICS plus. And then the last question is, what will be the impact? Well, my observation is, first, that will contribute to collective security. And then we can see that in the coming, say, 2 or 3 decades, we will have some kind of regional stability mechanism, right? And we will have our own agenda setting. For example, right now we have Middle East nuclear weapon free zone, but this is not an agenda we have, based on our own mechanism, based on our own regional stability mechanism. But I think in the future, we will have our own, regional stability mechanism. We will have our own security agenda setting mechanism. And thank you. This is basically my observation on these 4 remarkable questions. So thank you.
I'm grateful to you, Professor Son. This was excellent presentation. Now, I have now the ambassador, Mohammed Anis Salam, from Egypt. He's going to give perhaps a point of view of a Middle Eastern. He will represent the Middle East, hopefully to explain the expectation, concerns, whatever. Ambassador, in fact, is the coordinator also in Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs Working Group in the United Nations. He's also board members of the Center for Political Research and Studies and Intercultural Dialogue at Cairo University. Ambassador Salam worked with UNICEF across the world from 1984 to 2008. He is member of the advisory board of Boutros-Ghali Foundation for Peace and Knowledge, the foundation which promotes dialogue, free access to information, as well as peace and knowledge, while emphasizing Egyptian heritage and how it is reflected in Egyptians' present strategic importance and regional and global levels. And as I said, and I apologize to all the speakers, is a longer list of the CVs. I apologize because of time constraint. Now, Ambassador, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Ambassador Sultania. I have been enjoying the discussion here tonight, and I want to thank the presentations, very knowledgeable and very useful. In contrast to the presentations until now, I will be speaking not from the inside out, not from the point of view of a member state, but from the outside in, because Egypt is still standing at the doorstep of BRICS, having been invited, but has not really exercised its membership that will only become active in the beginning of next year. The acceptance of the issuing of an invitation to Egypt to join was presented in Cairo as a success to Egyptian diplomacy, that there were many countries that were seeking membership and that Egypt succeeded in joining, despite that there were competitors in this business. But also, this evoked certain memories of a time when the previous president, President Mubarak, declined to join BRICS because he couldn't see the usefulness of the gathering to Egyptian interests. So there has been a sea change in the attitude in Cairo. At the same time, while this was being presented as a success, there were some skeptical voices that were presented in the think tanks in Egypt or even in the media, who were having reservations or concerns about the wave of enthusiasm to this event of joining the BRICS grouping. Why was it of interest to Egypt to join BRICS? First, Egypt, as a keen observer of the international system, a very active country with a very active foreign policy, very big and professional diplomatic history and capacity. Egypt, there have been discussions about the changes in the international order from unipolar to multipolar, the effects of globalizations, the effects of the pivot to Asia, whereby the United States in particular was pivoting away from its involvement and its roles in the Middle East towards Asia. And this was interpreted as requiring a reassessment of Egypt's foreign policy and a redirection towards Asia. The economic factors played a very important role in this, that the dynamics of Egypt's relations with the BRICS countries were showing, particularly with China, were showing a very rapid growth in the volume of trade. So this was like more than 20% of Egypt's balance of trade was with China, something like $31 billion annually. If you look at some of the other countries in BRICS, you will see that they are the volume of trade is substantial, but not as dramatic as China, which represents, in BRICS, China represents 50% of Egypt's share of the balance of trade. So with India, it's around 6 billion. With Russia, it's under 5 billion. With Brazil, it's 1 billion. And with South Africa, it's only 300 million. So you can see that this weight of economic interests was a very important attraction for Egypt to seek membership and to perhaps try to solve some of the intrinsic economic problems that Egypt is suffering from, particularly its dependency on the US dollar and the possibilities of spinning off by de-dollarization. And this is where some of the skeptics were responding to say that it is the world will remain linked to the dollar, and that the experience of the euro shows how difficult it is to bring in a new currency and think that it will substitute to a large extent the role of the dollar in the international system of trade. So this brings us to the set of reservations that were being voiced by the skeptics in this Egyptian debate. So as we said, it was not realistic to expect a special currency. And then there was the skeptic that the Egyptians systematically like to create bureaucracies. They like to create organization. They want to see a certain order in things. And this is why for the Egyptians, the first question is, where is the secretariat of BRICS? What is the role of preparation and follow-up and the roles that secretariats need to play So it's not only a sporadic kind of meeting every 6 months or every year that brings people together. The other source of skepticism is the concern that the presence of Russia and China gives BRICS an anti-Western flavor. And this was seen by the skeptics as a matter of concern, while the people who were seeing this as a success were thinking, well, we need to have this kind of balance because Egypt's policy over the last 4 decades has been much closely oriented towards the West and particularly the United States. And there have been people voicing the concern and demand for pivoting towards Asia to balance this situation. Let me just stop here for a minute on the issue of, because I saw that Dr. Bowman mentioned the difficulty of coordinating political positions in conflict situations. He gave the example of Ukraine, but also the current situation of Gaza. I would say that what has happened in the Security Council with Brazil presenting a draft which had the consensus of everybody in the room, except that the United States used its veto, shows that the BRICS countries actually have a lot of commonality in the way of thinking, because it was fairly easy for the Brazilians to create a consensus and to find common ground between the parties in the room. So I think that perhaps there is some optimism, a sense of optimism of this kind of possibility of creating common ground, because there is a lot of common thinking. Let me just close by asking some questions. And one question is, these are open questions for the BRICS experience, still to be dealt with, still to be answered through the dynamics of membership. As I said, I'm talking from the outside looking in. One is there is a perennial question when we talk about Chinese strategy in the Middle East, and that is, to what extent is China willing to be involved in the geopolitics of the Middle East, to play security roles, to play a role in providing security for the shipping lanes where energy is being transported, to build on the Belt and Road initiative that now has a competition with the new project that brings India, Gulf, Middle East, Europe, the new corridor that is being proposed. The second set of questions relate to what are the concrete economic achievements that will be realized by Egypt's membership in BRICS. And this applies to some of the other countries that have joined also from the Middle East. For countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, it's not only the utilization of their sovereign funds, it's that they are in transition beyond the oil dependency on oil. In the next 20, 30 years, these countries will need to create new economies. So they have fundamental changes in front of them. There is the issue of the role of sanctions being imposed particularly by the United States, on countries like Russia and Iran. And the impact of increased economic growth on creating stability, this dream of creating a new Middle East that is prosperous and provides employment to young people and provides opportunities for investment and economic growth. Let me stop there, and I will be available for questions.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I appreciate that. particularly last part that you had also touched upon the other issues that Egyptians, because you're the only one from the Middle East, in fact, because of the number of the speakers. Therefore, we expected and hoped, and I'm thankful to you that you had also a holistic approach. Now, the next speaker is Dr. Christopher Roll, is an internationally renowned economist, especially in macroeconomic and energy economics. His skill set reflects a senior role in some of the world's most excellent institutions across the business, policy, and academia. He started his career in academy first in the research associate in Germany, and which is from 1991 to 96, and an assistant professor in economic University of California, Los Angeles. His most recent commercial expertise in energy, specifically oil and gas, and asset allocations, focus on microeconomic and geopolitical trends. He currently is an advisor to the companies and the governments globally, and adjunct senior research scholar at the Center on Global Energy Policy in Columbia University in New York since 2019. He was senior fellow at Harvard Kennedy School. From 2014 to 19, he served as global head of the research and Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, creating and managing ADIA first global research team and responsible for economic, energy, and geopolitical analysis across asset classes. Earlier, he was a group chief economist and vice president of BP Plus 2005-2014, credited with the significant contribution to global debate on energy, climate change, and various links between energy and economic development. Of course, as I said, the resume is long, and of course, many communications and publications. Therefore, and the last one, of course, Dr. Christopher Roll served as a global advisor and board director to the companies and energy institutes, which are very known. Without further ado, I request Dr. Roll to have the floor, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this discussion, and good evening to everybody. To some of you, good afternoon, but to most of you, good evening still, I think. I want to concentrate and refocus on the history and the prospects of the so-called BRICS group. And I have to say, I also want to focus analytically on the economics of it. First of all, because I'm an economist, and secondly, because I think most of us would agree that it's the economic prospects which will determine much of the political and the potential governance influence of the group. And the way I want to do this very briefly is to look first at where we come from. So the history, that's always a good idea, I think, when we talk about the future. Then secondly, ask, how will the group change by the accession of the 6 new members? Then thirdly, ask, what are the most likely roads of influence on the global economy and by implication governance systems? And then fourthly, what does all of that have to do with the Middle East and energy, the topic we've been asked to address here? I think it is in this case even more important than usually to be clear where we come from. The idea of the BRIC, not BRICS, BRIC economies, as many of you have mentioned, was formulated by an economist, by Jim O'Neill, whom I know, who now always talks about himself as the only economist who became famous on the basis of 4 letters, BRIC, which is to some extent true. But it's important to realize that this was a clearly identified group with very strict criteria. Jim O'Neill in the 1990s, late 90s, realized that as a share of the global economy, the share of Brazil, Russia, China, and India would likely to increase dramatically over the next decades. And it's important. He was not talking about countries which grow fast. He was not talking about Turkey or Taiwan or any other countries of that. And he was not talking of countries which are big. He was not talking of Indonesia or Nigeria or other countries with a high population. He was specifically talking of huge countries which would grow fast and therefore would increase their portion, their share of the global economy, and came up with these 4 names. And many people come up with many ideas and acronyms. So in his case, he got lucky because the subsequent decade from 2000 to 2010, roughly, was the decade in which really we have the world's on recorded highest growth ever for the non-OECD economies, so-called developing economies. I don't like that term. For the middle income countries, including, of course, for the 4 original BRICS. So he was completely vindicated and confirmed, and everybody started to use that acronym, including increasingly people for political purposes. But it's important to remember, it started as a clear economic concept. You can see how it became politicized by just looking at how the S entered the BRICS. Because for a long time, in the first decade of the 2000s, this high growth catch-up decade of middle income and poorer economies, people added an S, and some people added it for South Korea. And some people added it for, when the oil price reached its nadir, even for Saudi Arabia. And some people added it for South Africa. Now South Africa, for political reasons, became associated in 2010 at the meeting, which subsequent meeting to the Yekaterinburg summit, which established the political dimension of the BRICS. So you can see how it shifts gradually. You can also, of course, see the difference when you contrast it with the G7, because the original BRICS definition, this economic definition, is very different, contrary to what a colleague from China said, to the G7. The G7 always had a political or ideological dimension to it. They all understand themselves as basically fans of the same governance model, parliamentary democracy in one form or another. They are very close also in other forms of cooperation, as you can see in their ability to impose sanctions on other countries. The original composition of the BRICS had none of that sort. They were an economic conglomerate which had not much commonality in politics, and certainly that was not the defining characteristics of the first setup. But that is where we gradually have been moving. The original group, including South Africa, has also some interesting characteristics. We have already mentioned economically about 42% of the global population, about 1/3 of global GDP today. All 5 of them members of the G20. The new group, and I should also say, because we were talking about the Middle East later, in terms of commodity imports and exports, and specifically energy and very specifically oil, very relatively balanced. You know, the capacity of Russia to produce and of Brazil to export, and the imports of China and India make for a slight imbalance in the sense that they still need, as a group, oil imports or energy imports, but more or less balanced. The addition of the other 6 countries will change that composition in many aspects. So let me sort of, my second point, focus a little bit on how the group will change from an economic perspective. First of all, the additional 6 countries will add more in terms of population than in terms of GDP. So while it will remain a middle income group, it will be a group which becomes, on average, in per capita income terms, a little bit poorer than before, a little bit less sort of living standards than they had before. Much more importantly, the differences between the 6 countries, the accession countries, as I call them, and the old 5 countries are much, much larger than for the old 5 countries. So the economic difference in terms of per capita income between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Iran, and Saudi Arabia and the UAE is obviously much, much larger than the difference between any of the initial 5 members, even if you include South Africa, which is not a very rich country. And of the 6 accession countries, I said already, the original 5, all members of the G20, the 6 accession countries, only 1 member of the G20, Saudi Arabia. The original 5, only 1 huge big energy exporter, the biggest in the world, Russia, no OPEC member. Of the original 6, of the future 6 accession countries, half of them, as you know, are OPEC members. So now we're shifting to a group which will become much, much more diverse economically, a little bit poorer on balance. So the share of the global economy will increase, but not as strongly as the share of global income, and which will become much, much more powerful in terms of commodity exports, and energy exports, and very specifically in terms of oil exports. So that's a shift towards more diversity. And what I said earlier, that the initial classification of the group was strictly economic, it's obvious, of course, some of you have mentioned it, that the criteria for who will be joining are far from clear, that this was a much more politicized process. So it will become more diverse, slightly more poor, much more powerful in energy terms, and a much more politicized group, I would call it, for better or worse. The next question, again, from the economic perspective, what are the chances of them to influence the global economy? You can look at this from various angles. I think one important angle has been mentioned is the participation in economic governance structures. And the most important attempt which has been made there is this development, the new development bank, or officially also called the BRICS Development Fund, situated in Shanghai, which was supposed or perceived by much of the world as being a competitor to the IMF and the World Bank. Now, that bank is very well endowed in terms of the financial reserves and resources it has, mostly from China, but it has been, I know people working there, has been very much inactive, has done some investments in infrastructure, not played a big role in government support. And when you look at the accession 6 countries, then you have 2 countries in that group, Argentina and Egypt, which are currently an IMF and World Bank life support, I think is fair to say. There is no comparative role of this new bank, development bank, compared to either the BRICS members or other countries. Interestingly, it's still the opposite. If any economic support takes place, it takes place bilaterally. The most recent example is Argentina, which has just a few days ago, it went through the newspapers, received a major credit facility and swap credit line actually from China in order to bridge the time until they have elections. And that was done on bilateral grounds and not done through the development bank. So these institutions are still at the very beginning. The dream, of course, at least of 1 or 2 members of it, was to change as the ambassador Salim has mentioned correctly, to change the international monetary and financial system in favor of establishing the yuan and others, yuan at least, as a competitor to the US dollar as an international reserve currency. We know that China, despite its huge role in the global economy and in global trade, its currency doesn't play that role at all. It's only about 2% of international transactions are carried out in yuan, basically because it's not fully convertible and there's no open capital account. And we know that despite all the talk in the world, whenever you have a major crisis anywhere in the world, people do not buy rubles and they do not buy yuan, they buy US dollars. And so at the moment, the role of the US dollar seems to be pretty safe in that respect. And that brings, of course, very real and very big economic benefits to the US. Now, will they challenge that very fast? I give you an example from the energy world just to show you how difficult that is. There has been an attempt by China for years now to work together with Middle Eastern energy oil exporters to get some of these exports to be paid in Chinese currency. And the answer from a Middle East oil exporter, whether that makes sense or not, pretty strictly depends on whether they want to hold Chinese currency as a reserve currency or not, and whether they have a trade surplus or a trade deficit with China. Why is that? In very simple terms, most of the Middle Eastern currencies are actually tied to the US dollars. So there's not much reason to have Chinese currency as a reserve currency, especially not if you're worried that they may lose value over time and that their value is determined politically and not by free exchange. But if you are, say, a Middle Eastern country which exports oil to China and imports goods from China, and you have a trade surplus, then it doesn't matter. You can just get yuan for your oil and you spend all of them on imports for China. That would be, for example, the case of Saudi Arabia. It could do that without any impact on its own foreign currency reserve position. But if you are a country which has a deficit, so you sell whatever you sell to China, mostly oil, and then you buy goods, more goods than you already sell from China, then you would sit on this currency and you would have to decide what to do with it. And that is a very strong deterrent in case that's the case of the UAE. And there's no appetite, therefore, then to switch away from the dollar trade. so lo and behold, if you sum that up, it's a complicated situation, and the individual interests of countries, even if they have common features like selling oil and importing goods, will, for the foreseeable future, not allow for a political strategy which would say we dethrone the dollar and replace it with the yuan. That is, I think, very, very unlikely. And most economists in the world would say that the role of reserve currency is driven by all sorts of things, but unlikely to change as part of a political strategy. And then finally, let me say a few words about how this could all impact the Middle East and reflect on the Middle East. I think from an economist point of view, there's lots of country clubs and lots of acronyms and lots of things in the world. It's always better to be a member than not to be a member. It's always better to have many fingers in the pie or not. And from an economist point of view, it would be important to come back to the original, that's why I started with the history, reason the BRIC group was found. Jim O'Neill and other economists who observed that rising economic power of these big countries never thought of it in terms of competition and of a pie which now is going to be divided in different ways. They always thought about it economically as a good thing for the global economy if countries grow faster, because the whole economy will grow faster. And this is actually an increasing pie, making everyone better off. And I think a lot of that we can observe today. Is it good or bad for Middle East to be part of that? It's good for them. It's good if you have more countries where you can sell your oil to. It's good if you have more countries where you can accept currencies from. It's good if you have more countries for bilateral exchange. But never forget that it is good because more trade ultimately allows for a larger pie, a larger global economy. When you look at it from the perspective, is it a new governance structure? Is it a geopolitical tool for confrontation? Can we finally sort of whip the US and get better off? And then I think the whole project will have not much prospects because, as I said earlier, the policies of individual countries, and I'm only talking about economics, are way too different to be easily reconciled. And that would get ultimately in the way of economic growth. And if that club or any other club in the world gets in the way of economic growth, it becomes self-defeating. It will create losers. It will create disgruntled members and will not get very far. And therefore, I think it's important to know about the history and to stick to it and to use it as a tool for enhancing economic prospects and not as a tool for policy. That's the economist's appeal. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Of course, I was educated now a lot. Thank you very much. Being a nuclear scientist, I didn't have any opinion, and therefore I learned a lot. Thank you very much for this one. Now the last speaker is now Mr. Faisal Ahmad, Minister Faisal Ahmad, who is, of course, the member of advisory board also. He's was not able to be online because he's right now in Middle East for invited another important event. Therefore, he apologized and he has sent his a statement in video that my colleague will show. Before that, let me introduce Minister Faisal Ahmad. He graduated from University of Vienna and doctorate degree of law and worked 1 year in court practice. In 1971, he joined private industry and became product manager and later on director of sales for Helsinki Persil, Austria. He was elected as a representative of Lower Austria, in fact, in parliament between 1987 and 2006. And from 2000 until 2002, he was also third president or speaker of the Austrian parliament. From December 1990 until 2000, he was the federal minister of defense and thus became the longest serving minister of defense in the history of Austria. Furthermore, he founded the Central European Cooperation in Peacekeeping in 1997. From 2004 to 2015, he was the president of the Political Academy of the Austrian People Party and has been an honorary president since then. Currently, he is the president of Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy and head of Academic Council for, in fact, Wilfred Martin Center for European Studies in Brussels, president of Universität Zentrum in Vienna, and president of the Austrian Iranian and Austrian Slovak Society. The last but not least, of course, I have the honor to have him in our advisory board. And now, since, as I said, he was not able to be at the same time here, therefore, I request my colleague to show his video statement that we just received. Thank you very much.
The BRICS expansion certainly will be a major step for global politics. Why? Because it will shape a new structure in a way that was more or less unexpected for many international observers. The five BRICS countries, China, Russia, India, Brazil, and South Africa, will be enlarged with 6 new members. This is at least the official question. It is not quite sure yet whether it really will be 6 countries, because Argentine cannot be seen fixed up due to the fact that in Argentine there will be elections on October the 22nd, pretty soon, and opposition is harshly against a membership at BRICS, and also the candidate for the presidency. And insofar, we should focus also on the question of the other 5 members, which will be Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Iran. And already this selection shows very clearly that there is obviously a clear geostrategic and a clear geo-economic background behind this enlargement of BRICS. What is the geo-economic strategy behind it? For the first glance, you can see that practically all the other 5 members are situated in the Middle East region, in the MENA region, and that there are quite a few specifics. Up to now, the members of BRICS also belonged to the G20, which means they are among the leading circle of 20 nations globally, in an organization not very formal, but steered mainly by United States of America. BRICS, at the other hand, of course, is and will be also an informal organization steered mainly by China and Russia, maybe. What we can see now is, if we look to the new members, is that there will be 2 heavyweights, at least 1 economic heavyweight with Saudi Arabia. And at the other hand, also the Emirates certainly will contribute quite a bit, not so much from GDP, not so much from population, but the most important factor and effect of this enlargement will be that the BRICS now will comprehend 3 out of the 4 major producers of oil worldwide, which will be Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. And this certainly will fit perfectly in Putin's strategy of keeping resources short for Western countries, or at least, as he declared, it will be sort of an end of cheap prices, because this group of countries more or less will be a kind of a small OPEC plus organization sitting on one table. And the highly interesting effect certainly will be that we will have two very important, or the most important countries, at least for the future, for energy demand, China and India on the one hand, and the main producers at the other side. If we look at it from another goal that was proclaimed, de-dollarization, most experts are thinking that probably the immediate effect will not be very high to substitute the dollar by national currencies, whether this will be Chinese or Russian or whatever. Russia already has to do it due to the sanctions, and also a new member, Iran, of course, tries or has to try to organize most of its trade not on a dollar basis but on national currencies, and exchange by trade immediately between two countries. What we can see out of it is, if we look at it geopolitically and geostrategically, that of course now the organization, the BRICS, will comprehend a very strong part of the Middle East, not only with the countries I have named already, with Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates, but also with Egypt and with Ethiopia. What is new certainly will be that 4 of those countries have not been a member of any other leading circle like G20 up to now. And this certainly will be of utmost importance for the situation of Iran, which certainly has a function as a regional leader, but was not included by political reasons from the Western side up to now. If we go a little bit deeper, then we can see that the effects by this enlargement certainly should not be underestimated. There is, of course, a political dimension, an anti-Western dimension, due to the fact that the old members try to win more or less the leading countries of the Arab world, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the Emirates, the biggest nation, the richest nation, and the most modern nation. And in addition to it, not only Arab countries, but also the other side of the Gulf, Iran, which did not have a seat at any international table of major importance up to now, as I said, but will have the chance to do so within the BRICS Plus organization. And this certainly also will bring new effects into at least the regional situation. If we look to the achievements of this enlargement, and on the other hand also of the challenges for this enlargement, you have to look at the fact that it certainly will be an achievement that Iran and Saudi Arabia will sit on one table. They not only have established now diplomatic ties, but they will also sit on a table regularly in different kinds of of meetings, whether this is summits or foreign ministers or ministers of economy. And therefore, this certainly will contribute to a lessening of tensions between those countries. A similar effect you can see probably also between Egypt and Ethiopia, due to the danger, for the security danger coming out of this new situation of the newly built Nile Dam in Ethiopia, which certainly is a challenge. It has become a strong challenge for the neighboring countries, especially Sudan, and to the highest extent for Egypt. So far, something that has happened already in the past, that the BRICS also were not only an assembly of economically emerging countries, but they also had a chance to sit on a table and discuss challenges, even if there were antagonistic situations, like between China and Russia on the one hand, but especially between India and China at the other side. This also will continue now with Iran and Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Ethiopia. So far, you can say this enlargement certainly is an achievement and will be a worthwhile contribution for world peace if it works out well. And on the other side also, of course, this constellation will mean that the coherence between the countries of the BRICS Plus certainly will not be similar to the coherence between the countries, member countries of G7. And certainly a clear political outcome of this constellation cannot be expected so easily. And insofar, it is quite interesting. There's another geostrategic perspective that will be quite interesting. I mean, those countries now will control highly important roads and ways of connectivity, especially maritime connectivity. And if you look to the map, you can see that now the BRICS Plus altogether will control more or less the maritime ways between Europe and Asia through the Suez Canal, Red Sea, and Bab el-Mandab. Also, it will control the way between the Gulf and the Indian Ocean, Strait of Hormuz, by Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates. In addition to that, if you look to what is already existent, that also the Cape of Good Hope more or less could be controlled in the future by South Africa. And on the other hand, if by the climate change, there will be also a chance maybe to establish a new traffic line at the so-called Northeastern Passage across the Arctic Ocean in the north of Russia, then this would mean a major change in geostrategic control of global connectivity. And one should not underestimate that also such long-term goals at least helped to be a background for the selection out of new member countries of BRICS Plus. On the other hand, we will have to look forward how strong this new group of countries, how strongly they really will be able to work together. But what we can say anyhow, will be very sure, that it is a clear signal that not only the importance of the Indo-Pacific Ocean will furthermore increase, but you also can see that probably between Western world and China and Russia at the other side and some other countries, there will be a very strong competition on the Asian peninsulas, not only in Southeast Asia, where it is happening already economically and politically, but also in Western Asia, now in the Gulf region, and especially also in India. I wish you all the best at your meeting. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the presentation by Minister Fasalvan. I know that the time is running, but of course it was an important point, and we had very top experts that have to elaborate. Permit me to shortly ask our, in fact, the intern, who is a PhD student from Jawahar Nehru University, and she has worked on this one, and her paper is already on website. I request her to shortly give her findings, and if there are any questions that she thinks that the experts, or of course for the future our activities we have to deal with. Now I request Ms. Swata Basak from India. Please, you have the floor. Please unmute. Please unmute. No, we cannot hear you. Hello?
Am I audible now?
Yes, yes. Okay.
Okay, I'll just take it out. Thank you so much to all the speakers for such an comprehensive insights. So under the supervision of Ambassador Sultania, I also wrote a paper on BRICS and how it has paved a new avenue for the geostrategic predictability in the Middle East, where I've mentioned like that when we talk about BRICS, it is frequently criticized as an odd alliance that lack political coherence, aside from their desire to change the existing global financial and governmental structures towards more open, diverse, and unrestrictive, and less dependent on the American politics and the dollar purchasing power. The BRICS group made a big drive to gain more political and economic prominence in the Middle East by enlarging itself and including more countries. Saudi Arabia and the UAE would give an organization would give BRICS an organizational addition to its financial growth. Apart from that, considering Tehran's close and somehow strategic relations with Russia and China, and Riyadh's strong, long-standing security cooperation with the United States, the inclusion of Iran besides Saudi Arabia was probably the big surprise to the West. Saudi leaders, however, are dubious about the Washington's sincerity in its support for Middle East, and therefore, early this year, Saudi and Iran engaged in diplomatic negotiation in Beijing that improved China's standing in the Middle East. And Tehran, which has never been a favorite of Washington, has become more connected to Beijing, which has enabled it to circumvent US's sanction by purchasing the oil at the discounted prices. In the view of this, my question to all the speakers is that how to navigate when we talk about the Middle East. The scholars said that the only predictability about Middle East is unpredictability. So in this review of this, how predictable the Middle Eastern security situation will be under this BRICS enlargement? This is my first question. And the second question is, can the Washington really ignore the BRICS as it earlier did? And my third question is specifically to Professor Varun Sahani, sir, that Jim O'Neill, he was also present in the G20 summit in New Delhi in the last month. And he said that apart from BRICS and the G7, now the G20 is growing as the new avenue where the global South can really reflect its view. So what is the opinion? How Jim Nail's new vision of this comment of G20 on G20 is actually reflecting the future of global governance and future of the multilateralism? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for your brevity and also informing the important points and questions. Of course, as I said, your paper, which was valuable work, is on the website and those interested could see. I hope that all distinguished colleagues who have been with us and they're still online will be patient and bear with us another maybe 10 minutes. Now I have to ask, of course, I wanted to have many of the participants to interact, but I see now Ambassador Faruqi, the chair of the advisory board, that she wants perhaps to give some comments or question. I then give her floor, please. Ambassador, you have the floor. Hello, can you hear me? Could you unmute, please? We cannot hear you. Hello? We cannot hear you. Could you unmute your microphone on the Zoom on your link down there? No, I cannot hear you. Then possibly I can, at the meantime, I hope that Ambassador Faruqi will be able to call on us at least, because it seems that the system doesn't work. We cannot hear her. Now, I think that I see Dr. Steven Groot, yes, from South Africa. He's also online. If he can give some comments, then we have had the full scope of the viewpoints. Can you give some comments if you can, please?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you have the floor. Yes.
Great. I'm joining you from Johannesburg, and going into the BRICS summit this year, there was a lot of uncertainty as to which countries would be chosen and whether, in fact, countries would be chosen at this time, because South Africa was working on criteria for admission, and we thought that there was resistance from India and Brazil to expand at this summit. So there was a lot of speculation. There was a lot of trying to figure out whether it was going to expand and who was going to be expanded. I think the momentum of all of these many countries that one of the speakers showed earlier, expressing interest in wanting to join, that momentum was inevitable that some countries would be chosen. I think we're still a little bit mystified as to the exact mix, because those criteria haven't been made public to my knowledge. I mean, I've heard from Indian sources that India was, the accession of, sorry, I just lost my train of thought for a second, that India wanted Bangladesh perhaps to be one of the countries, but then China said, if you have Bangladesh, we have to include Pakistan, and that was a non-starter for India. So I think there are a lot of permutations that it's going to make the BRICS more complex. I would be interested to see whether the tone of declarations becomes more strident and more explicitly anti-Western with the addition of a country like Iran, and how quickly other members might be chosen. Are they going to have a period of consolidation as these new members settle in? And as one of the previous speakers said, Argentina is by no means a certainty. It depends what happens in their election, but say 5 or 6 of them do join on the 1st of January. How long will it be before other countries are considered? Will they have a period of settling in and settling down? And just yes, to say thank you to all of the speakers. It was really fascinating to hear perspectives from many of the original BRICS members, particularly Ambassador Salem from Egypt. I was very interested to hear what you had to say, and all the other speakers, Professor Sani, etc. So this is a bit impromptu. I wasn't planning to present it, and I know we're already over time, so I'm happy to answer questions, but I think that's an intervention from South Africa. And I think the summit was seen as a great success in South Africa. I think had President Putin decided to come, that would have been a sideshow, and that would have been where all the energy focused. I think it was able to focus on the enlargement and the de-dollarization rather than whether Putin would come and whether he would be arrested or not. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate your comments. I apologize, as I said, because of the number of the top experts in the panel, we were wondering, and of course, your availability. But I'm very grateful that you joined us and you give your comment, which is very valuable. I'm grateful to you. Still, I'm waiting for Ambassador Farouqi. I hope she will be able to join us. I hope that would be the case. Let's see, I don't know. But she's, let me see. Yes. Let me see if I can, the last moment I can call her. But, well, it is not possible. But, and of course, she has sent a note to me. Ambassador Farouqi, yes, I see now your name. Just touch upon the mute, which is red, unmuted. Yes, can you hear me now? Hello. Ah, no, unfortunately, we cannot hear. I don't know what's wrong, but the system, something is wrong. We cannot hear you, Ambassador. But of course, Ambassador had some points about the fact that the Middle East having 3 straits of Suez Canal, Hormuz, and Bab el-Mandeb, and these are, of course, contribution that the Middle East countries could give to the BRICS after these BRICS Plus, in fact. And there have been other points, of course, that, this is the note that, part of the note that read that she was sending, but she had, of course, other points to raise. But anyway, I want to thank all of you, distinguished friends, speakers, participants who have been so tentative. And this was a great, in fact, opportunity for us to listen to you. And I appreciate your insight and very useful food for thought. Of course, we will have a follow-up, and we try to, in fact, incorporate, we have duly noted of these issues. And of course, after receiving the consent and agreement by the speakers, then we will put the statements and presentations on our website. However, of course, we have recorded for our own internal purposes, because as I said, this was a Chatham House, let's say, meetings. Therefore, permit me to follow these regulations. But however, I will appreciate also the participant to kindly reflect via our email any comments or any suggestions that maybe we can have a sort of project to somehow compilation of these issues and raise the very valuable points. And perhaps in our next publication, that would be very useful. Therefore, I appeal to all of you, give your comments, questions, and even there are some questions I can forward it and play a role of intermediary with the speakers and back and forth. And I'm sure that this would be very helpful. Once again, on behalf of VIIMES, I want to express sincere appreciation that you've joined at this very crucial moment. And I'm sure that all of you agree with me that this kind of arrangement, BRICS and BRICS Plus, all those will help and will facilitate the cooperation among the countries, will enhance, in fact, the sustainable development, which, in fact, at the end of the day, it will also contribute to the security of the region and global at large. Let's hope for the peace and prosperity in the Middle East and the whole world. I'm grateful to all of you, and God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you all. This was great.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you indeed. Thank you.